Welcome to NAIFA's June Big Ideas webinar, Beyond the Mask, How My Strategy Sparked an Incredible Life. I'm Brendan Burnett, and with us today is Brian P. Walsh. As a young firefighter, Brian Walsh had so much to look forward to. Then, in an instant, caught in a burning building where everything went wrong, he found himself clinging to life, his face burned beyond recognition. As he began to heal, loved ones encouraged him to pursue a career and life that would keep him largely hidden. But Brian chose another route. He chose not to let that tragedy destroy him, and instead used it to create a magnificent life, both personally and professionally. At 26, Brian Walsh co-founded Walsh and Nicholson Financial Group, which today serves over 1,000 clients in wealth management, estate and retirement planning, and insurance services. In addition to holding FINRA Series 7, 6, 63, 24, and 65 securities registrations and multiple insurance licenses, Brian is also a chartered life underwriter, chartered financial consultant, and registered financial consultant. Brian is deeply engaged in both professional and charitable organizations. Two areas of service are particularly important to Brian: finding a cure for juvenile diabetes and supporting firefighters. And he was president of the Eastern Pennsylvania chapter of the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation and currently serves as the nominating committee chair. He is also a life member of Levittown, PA, Fire Company No. 2, and a trustee for the Lower Merion Firemen's Relief Association. Brian resides in Haverford, Pennsylvania with his wife, Marianne. They have 3 children, Brian, Matthew, and Catherine. And prior to the webinar, I was reading Brian's book, Beyond the Mask. And the first thing that I noticed was that in the introductions to the first 2 chapters of the book, Brian quotes Viktor Frankl, followed by Kurt Vonnegut. And so I knew that Brian and I would get along just fine when I read that, and we have a lot to talk about today. This is appropriate because Frankl drew from his experience of survival to pioneer what he called logotherapy, or the therapy of meaning. And I found Beyond the Mask to truly be a book that was infused with meaning. And I'm thrilled that Brian Walsh is with us today, sharing his story and his insights into resilience, meaning, and hope. Brian, welcome to the Big Ideas webinar.
Brendan, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with my fellow NAIFA members. I want to thank you and Adam for all your hard work in getting this set up this afternoon. I'm looking forward to sharing my story with all of you. And I think the part I'm going to share with you should last approximately 20 minutes or so. Then I think what we'd like to do is go into a Q&A area where I want you to feel free, and I think there's a button in there where you can ask questions, and we'll have them all at the end. But please, nothing will be out of bounds. You can ask me whatever you hear in this story that intrigues you or may motivate you to ask a question, or certainly anything industry related. So again, thank you all for attending today. I do appreciate it. And again, Brendan, thank you so much for the kind introduction. When I was 17 years old, you could say I was your typical average teenager. I was a senior in high school. Looking forward to all the things that all of us look forward to in our senior year of high school, whether it's the football season, the soccer season, the ice hockey season for us in the Northeast, and going to proms and spring breaks and all the things that come along, and of course, graduation. What was not so average about my teenage experience, but I was also a volunteer fireman in my local town. Firefighting was really a passion of mine. It made up for how I felt in school with fairly low self-esteem due to undiagnosed dyslexia. Teachers didn't know what it was at the time. They would often send me out to those dreaded trailers where they sent the underperforming students for remedial classes. I don't know if any of you on the call remember those depressing trailers, but to me they were awful. But they did their job, I guess. Being a firefighter, I was respected very much for my work ethic. I was good at it. It fed my interest in helping people and contributing to a larger cause. It was really a rush for me to hear the beeper go off and jump in the car and head up to the station to really spark your adrenaline. Uh, when I started as a fireman at 16 years old, I was an active fireman for 18 months when I had my accident. I had helped put out more than 300 fires at that time. To have gone that long without an injury, I did feel incredibly lucky. And I'm sure all of you remember that feeling of invincibility that we all have from time to time. And one of the things that, I think we all learn is eventually we aren't invincible. And some of the things I want to share with you today will hit that point home. I always felt that luck was on my side until it wasn't. On the night of October 23rd in 1981, I had many small trivial decisions that night that contributed to being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was about 1:30 in the morning, my pager went off. I left the house, jumped into my mother's Toyota Corolla, and with all that adrenaline, ran up to the firehouse. When I arrived at the firehouse, we could see there were visible flames at the building that we were being called to. I wasn't expecting to go into the building, so I didn't have any breathing apparatus on. Since the captain was under the impression that the fire was manageable and certainly thought it was under control, he asked me to take a fire hose up to the 3rd floor to the firemen that were already there. So I found myself taking this hose up, a couple guys behind me helping me out, and a couple of our other firemen were on the 2nd floor checking for the extension of the fire or to see if it had spread. As those firefighters pulled down ceilings, they discovered flames burning above them, which meant we were standing on top of them. Before those firefighters could reach the stairwell to alert us, everything went black. It's called a flashover. If anyone had ever seen the movie Backdraft, a flashover and a backdraft have effectively the same result. There's different sciences at play. A flashover, there's a brief moment where there's not enough oxygen to support combustion. In that moment of blackness consumes the space as gases and superheated air gather and wait for a trigger. Finally, the fire discovers a stairwell draft or a broken window or a hole in the roof, which gives it the oxygen it needs to have it erupt into a much larger, all-consuming fire. The fire chief had evacuated the building. It sounded like a freight train had been running down the hallway. The heat from that was reaching 800 to 1,000 degrees. I couldn't see a thing, let alone find my partner, who I later learned went out a window. I was beyond choking. I had actually begun to burn. I fell to my knees and crawled my way along a fire hose toward an exit. I found the exit, pushed it open with my shoulder. The cold air hit my nerve endings from my newly burned face, and I screamed for help. If you think that 3rd-degree burns all over your face and internal bleeding of your lungs sounds pretty painful, I can tell you that the healing process was much more excruciating. I would make St. Agnes Burn Center in South Philadelphia my home for the next 6 weeks. When I arrived, I was already intubated, not being able to see, burnt beyond recognition, and my head was the size of a basketball. Like every burn patient at St. Agnes, I was initiated to what they called the tub room. Oh, that's the wrong tub. Sorry about that. I'm talking about the metal tub room where they take you to clean wounds. This is where happy thoughts go to die, in my view, where they scrub all your burned body parts to reduce the chance of infection. As this brush scrubs your wounds, it is excruciating. This would continue twice a day, every day, for 4 weeks. They scrubbed every micro inch of where I'd been burned. Anytime they reached a place where nerve endings were exposed and where I could feel the tiniest surface area that was teased or pulverized, I prayed to pass out from the pain. But still, one of the most painful moments of my stay at St. Agnes when, against all protocol, several weeks after my accident, I decided that I was going to take my bandages off, and I snuck into the bathroom, removed the bandages, and saw the face that was staring back at me. I did what I think anyone would do after looking at themselves after that. What did I actually look like? It sent me to tears. It was hard to imagine how I would find a way to find that Brian again, because I couldn't see him in the mirror at that moment. So today, you might be wondering why I'm the happiest person I know. Really, I'm never down in the dumps or hopeless. In fact, I'm usually happy, very happy, and I have a lot of reasons to be that way. The fact that I'm happy is the reason I'm speaking with you today. I want to share what I learned over a lifetime after I took the bandages off that fateful day. Fighting your way back after a life-altering event, no matter how big or small, makes you mentally stronger. Resilience is a life skill and a leadership quality that everyone should cultivate. A brawny brain helps us cope with stress, handle change, and bounce back from unexpected roadblocks in life. Without it, the next setback or challenge could be a deal breaker for us. The road to becoming mentally strong is unique for every person. Three key phases marked my journey toward a heartier version of me, and they're applicable to anyone who's interested in performing their best and fulfilling a full life. Today, I want to explore those powerful lessons with you. The first one is resolve. Looking back on my life right after the fire, you would say the first phase I went through on my journey was finding the resolve to move on from anxiety and uncertainty. When you face the healing after an event like mine, you wear a full, tight post-op mask. We're all familiar with masks right now because of COVID-19, but they're not the masks I'm speaking about right now. These were called compression or Jobst masks. And this mask I wore for 2 years, 23 hours a day, and was only allowed to take it off to bathe or to eat. In February of my senior year of high school, I went back while still wearing this mask. The general response was pretty sympathetic, but unfortunately, there's always someone who couldn't handle that change. They either acted awkwardly or ignored me altogether. They let this mask get in the way of interacting with who I was. You all know how hard it is to connect with someone when you're wearing a COVID mask today. It's hard to talk, hard to breathe, show expression. I experienced the same thing with the mask, except I was the only one out there wearing it. And no one had ever seen my kind of mask before. So the effect it had on others and me was dramatically compounded. COVID or no COVID, everyone has a mask, metaphorically speaking. A mask is simply something physical or emotional that puts up a barrier to connecting with others, connecting with who we really are and our own reality. If you're wearing that metaphorical mask of your own, it becomes increasingly frustrating. I want to challenge you to use that irritation to fuel your resolve. It's where you'll find yourself again. I began to push past my own frustrations with my mask, and resolve ended up taking its place. One way to honor the resolve is to make a public promise that reflects what you value and what you hope for. A verbal declaration backed by purpose always shifts your own thinking about how serious you are. My first real career choice after the accident was the first public promise that I made to myself. I had a job offer from Mutual of Omaha. It was to work in a highly interactive sales position with the public. As everybody on this webinar knows, we see people every day and as many people as we can. My family was very leery of me taking this on and preferred that I took a job that didn't involve a lot of face-to-face interaction. After a lot of soul searching and thinking about my future, I decided that my face told a story that was more uplifting than depressing. Because here I was in front of potential clients doing something productive, aspiring to something greater, trying to turn a dream into a reality, not hiding. As I dug deeper into why I wanted to pursue a very interactive and challenging career, I started to have incredible clarity. Answering your why means getting to the root of your individual values and beliefs, which requires really looking in the mirror beyond your mask. When's the last time you really looked in the mirror and asked yourself why you do what you do? The next lesson I learned on my journey was the power of reclaiming my life. Why it's essential to really look in the mirror at yourself and be resolved about what you see, what wasn't, and why. I also learned that trusting what you are, not what others see in you, was much more important. I was the only one who could live the life I was given. It was up to me to reclaim it. I had to live with any decision I made, but I wanted to make sure it was my decision. If your position is unique, and really everyone's is, then trust yourself, especially when no one else has your worldview, because quite frankly, nobody else does. Sure, it's essential to have that short list of people who believe in you, and I'll talk a little bit about that a little later. But it's imperative that you put yourself at the top of that list. If I hadn't believed in myself, how could I have decided that my life tells a story of resolve and inspiration instead of caution and fear? If you're willing to bet on the best version of yourself, then others will be willing to bet on that version of you as well. And that's a really good thing. If you have someone's back and they have yours, you're nurturing essential social connections that are critical to your mental well-being. Your capacity for coping with stress and conquering obstacles is greatly impacted by the social bonds that you have. One of the world's leading experts on the connection between happiness and success is best-selling author Sean Akor. He says, rather than turn inward when under stress, the most successful people take the exact opposite approach. They know that good social relationships are the single greatest investment that you can make. As a matter of fact, a 75-year study on men at Harvard found that the most important factor in happiness over one's lifetime was social bonds. Stephen J. Daniels has a humorous view on the importance of close social bonds. He says, a good friend will help you move, but a true friend will help you move a body. My friends, Sonny and Tina, along with my wife, Marianne, have a different name for this type of truest friend. The kind you can call at 3 in the morning and they will just be there, not asking you questions and not judging you. But they will just drop everything. They're called your Foxhole friends. Who are your Foxhole friends? Ask yourself that question. More importantly, ask this question of yourself. Who are you a Foxhole friend for? Are you reaching out to others and they to you? How do you show others empathy and affection? In the workplace, how do you show dependability and camaraderie? Making Foxhole friends and being that person for someone else is absolutely critical to those moments in life when you need strength in numbers. Unfortunately, you don't always have your Foxhole friends. I'm sure you found yourself in these situations when you're confronted by someone's insensitivity, or quite frankly, their outright stupidity. It's called those excuse me moments. I didn't realize it at the time, but situations for nurturing those interactions were brewing over a series of events. One event that comes to mind is I was in Disney World with my family, and my kids at the time were 12, 10, and 8. And I'll never forget the ride. We were waiting for the rock and roller coaster at Hollywood Studios. And we were waiting in one of those long lines that doubles back on one another and, just seems to be endless. And I'm sure we've all been in those. But a few teenagers were sitting there mocking my looks and talking under their breath. And I was trying to ignore it. And at one point, my daughter, Katie, turned to say something to them. And I grabbed her shoulders and turned her back toward me. And I said to her, you can't worry about what people think. I told her to be kind. We don't know what they've been through. And if it doesn't matter to me, it shouldn't matter to you. Though you may not have suffered a burned face like I have, maybe you find yourself often caught off guard by other people. For some reason, they say something in a social or work situation, and you don't like the way it makes you feel, probably marginalized. It sticks with you like a bad case of the flu. You might have a series of events, like I do, that are now part of your story. My solution to this, my way of continuing to reach out, was always throw the first punch at yourself. I try to disarm people with humor and honesty. Once at a company banquet, the manager of the event space was looking for someone to pay the bill. My brother Ed was the executive vice president for our company at the time, handling all these matters. And the manager was mistakenly directed to me. When the manager got over to me and he said, Mr. Walsh, here's your bill. I said, oh, would you mind giving that to my brother Ed? The manager looked at me and said, what does he look like? I said, well, he looks like me, only not burned. Well, the poor guy obviously had a aha moment. We did let him off the hook with our laughter. But this is the way that humor can often make people feel much more comfortable when they're in an awkward situation. When preparing to deliver a speech at a recent induction that I attended, they asked me what music I wanted at the end. I've absolutely said, Talking Heads, Burning Down the House. Inappropriate? Absolutely. Funny? To me, yes. They played it. I'm not really sure how many people ended up getting the joke, but it did bring a lot of laughter to the room. Everyone has been in a situation where they needed to fuse a potentially awkward moment. By throwing the first punch at yourself, you can disarm others around you and define the exchange rather than let it evolve into its own and hope for the best. What could throwing the first punch be in your life? What is your way of taking a risk and reaching out? How might you make someone feel more at ease in a very difficult situation? You have to get beyond the mask and face yourself so you can face others head on. Don't let a setback or a regret drain your resolve, prevent you from reclaiming your voice, or cause you to withhold rather than to reach out to overcome any obstacle in life. It's very fitting that the Welsh translation for the motto on my family coat of arms means transfixed but not dead. There is legend that says the Walsh family used to pretend to be dead during battles before waking and conquering a fatigued enemy. I've also taken this motto to heart to mean injured but not finished. Don't let your setbacks finish you. Be resolved, reclaim what's yours, and reach out to the world around you. Because we all know, especially now, life is a gift, not a given. Thank you for listening, and we'll be glad to take any of your questions at this point.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. Of course, a fascinating story and tremendous insights that we pulled from that. I have a question about Johnny. Now, Johnny was a firefighter that was on duty with you on that night. And you mentioned that one thing that a firefighter must do is follow orders, but Johnny did not follow orders. Is that correct? He went into that building after you and he saved you. Is that correct, Brian?
That is correct. He was on his way, following the orders on his way out the building. The chief at the time, Jack Quinn, was friends with him till the day he died. He was a great man, one of my mentors in life. So was Johnny, for that matter. And obviously, I owed him a complete debt of gratitude. But Chief Quinn had said to John and the other fireman, Ken Sims, I evacuated the building. You can't go in there. Johnny looked. Now, Johnny was at one time, he wasn't at that time, but was a deputy chief. And he said, Jack, look, I heard somebody scream. I want to give it a shot. And he said, absolutely not. If they're up there, they're dead. And I don't want to lose anybody else tonight. And Johnny said, please, Chief, I want to go up, and just worked his way up. Didn't wait for him to answer the second time. And I was very fortunate in the fact that Johnny and this other firefighter, Ken Sims, went up to find me. And the ironic part of the story when they tell it is that when they got to the top of the stairwell, where I had opened the door with my shoulder and was laying at the top of the stairwell, obviously unconscious, they were getting ready to leave. They really could not find me. The smoke was so dense. Well, what ended up happening was when they turned around to leave, they had a flashlight banded to their fire helmet. We all did. And when he turned to leave, the flashlight hit the reflective tape that was on the back of my coat. And he literally just reached out and grabbed that coat and drug me out. So it's really a tremendous story of bravery on his part. And I guess what he did really was not go against the orders, but he asked for forgiveness later.
Which sounds like kind of the essence of judgment that he showed as well, because sometimes you have to take courageous action based on your own judgment in that case. So fascinating story. I want to talk to you a little bit about your meteoric rise, I'm going to call it meteoric, in the insurance and financial services industry. How did your experience as a firefighter and your story, how did that impact your rise in the industry? And what would you say to a young advisor who is having difficulty with self-doubt, with call reluctance, with any of the many things that contribute to the washout rate in our industry? I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
So, it's really funny. I often reflect back on this, and I think at the end of the day, I had a lot of persistence in my body. I had a lot of tenacity, a lot of perseverance. That looking back on it now, I know that's what it was, but as you're going through it, you really don't know that that's the definition of it. It's kind of a strange thing in my mind. But one of the things that I really focused on was I was a volunteer fireman in high school because we wanted to there was a group of us that just wanted to always help people. And some joined the EMS squad, some joined the scouts, some of us were volunteer firemen, but we all did something to give something back to the community, or to give back to the world, or to help the place be better. And I think that was always ingrained in me somehow, some way, I don't know. I don't think I'll ever know. But at the end of the day, that need to help people, that desire to have an impact on people's lives, overrode everything else I felt. And I'm not telling you there weren't times I was devastated, is probably not too strong a word. But I had rejection because of the way I looked that most people in our business would never get. And, it's just, it was an unfortunate accident. I I was very fortunate to be alive. I had three near-death experiences in the burn center, and the fourth one, the infection that ran through the burn center, should have taken me out. The ironic thing about that is when that infection ran through the burn center, there were 12 of us in there at the time, and I was the only one to walk out. All 11 other patients passed away. All had the same infection, and I was the last one standing. So when the reality of all that hits you at 17 years old, your life perspective changes. You know, why am I here? What, you know, there's got to be a reason I'm here. I got to find myself. I didn't go to spring break. I didn't go to the prom. I didn't, do all the things that, quite frankly, I missed out on and wished I had been able to do them. But at the other side of that coin is, I used all of that energy that I used to stay alive and just put it into my mentality that I wanted to help people. I knew I was never going to be an active firefighter again. And this was a great way to do it. I mean, everybody on this call has a great impact on the quality of people's lives, right? I mean, I think they would all agree with that. We send kids to college. We're there in the event of a horrible disability, in the event of a horrible death, where somebody may be leaving behind a young wife or a young husband and small children, and we help them live a life of dignity because of the products that we offer. No other profession can do that. None. Zero. We send kids to college, and we help people live a life that they've dreamed about in retirement. And it's a career, when you realize what our career can do, we can just span our lifetime. It is not a career where you go work for 20 years and retire with a pension. This is a career where we're impacting generations of people in the best way that any profession can do, with maybe the exception of the medical community. Accountants can't do it. Lawyers can't do it. We are the only ones. So you have to really keep that in mind. And yes, people are going to reject you by hanging up the phone or not answering your email, but you have to be persistent. You have to stay after them, because what we do is important. The products we bring to them are important, and they need to understand that, and it's our job to make them realize it.
One thing I noted in reading your book is that there's a tremendous amount of life experience in this, a tremendous amount of wisdom as well, and in your interpretations of some of the lessons. And one of the quotes that really stuck with me is, there was always a cost to avoiding confrontation, especially if the one you're avoiding is you. And I wanted to talk a little bit about avoiding confrontation, because I personally hate confrontation. It's just, I try to avoid it as best I can, but the truth is you can't always avoid it. And
Sure.
There's some circumstances in which you must act as a parent or as a boss, or else the results are catastrophic. And confrontation, I think, it's a muscle almost that you can work on, isn't it? It's a form of courageous authenticity. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think confrontation, the word, gets a bad rap, quite frankly. Because people look at confrontation and say confrontation, they think it's violent. Confrontation is not necessarily violent. If it's a physical confrontation, obviously it can be. But the word confrontation to me is confronting what is in front of you that needs to be resolved. Okay? So that doesn't have to be nasty. It's just having a discussion. It's no more to me than having a discussion. It may be a more forceful discussion. It may have an ultimatum in it, where a regular discussion wouldn't. But a confrontation, I mean, I'll share a very, very personal story with everybody in the audience today, which I don't share all. I share it when it's appropriate. I think it's appropriate here. I had a son who had an addiction problem, and it it was something that addiction can tear a family apart, and way too many people feel that today because it happens. People, especially today, the opioid crisis and everything else, there's tremendous amounts of addiction issues out there, whether it's alcohol, drugs, whatever. At the end of the day, I had to take my middle son out of college during his junior year. And I brought him home and I said, look, you have a problem, and I'm going to help you with this problem as much as we can. But you have to want to get better. So he moved back home, and things were great for about 10 months. And he was going to all his outpatient, going to his, lack of a better term, AA meetings, all that stuff. He's going to a psychologist, to really get his life in order. And all of a sudden, as a quote, my oldest son had just gotten accepted in the police academy in Prince William County, Virginia. So he was moving away. My second son was home, obviously. I said, why don't the three of us just go on a little fishing trip? So we went down to Key West for a long weekend after Thanksgiving, and the second night we're there, my son decided that he was not going to be sober anymore, and put his life in jeopardy. And I got him to a hospital in time. He was fine. The next day we flew home. I was in communication with my wife and my daughter. And I said, you all meet me at the doctor's office. And I, quite frankly, we all sat there, and I told them, hey, I said 10 months ago, I would spend this money. We would do everything we do to help this kid. And he's sitting in the room. And if I was sitting here a year from now, I would not be happy. And we're almost at a year. So I'm not happy. And I said, I know this isn't your fault. Anybody in this room, it's not your fault. I looked at my son in front of his sister, his brother, and his mother, who were all in tears at this point. And I said, look, son, here's the deal. You're going to a rehab facility. It's going to be inpatient, and it's going to be intensive. And it's your choice to make. You can get on a plane tomorrow morning. These people will find a place for you to go. Or you can go to the YMCA or the Salvation Army and find yourself a place to live. But you're never coming back into my home again. And I will tell you, it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life to this day. You could call that a confrontation. I called it a necessary conversation. And thankfully, to this day, he's just turned 31 years old. He's sober for 11 years. So, confrontations are what you make of them. And a lot of times they're just necessary. Long-winded answer to your question. I apologize.
No, very important answer. Thank you for that. Another part of your book, you tell a very moving story I found about a call center. And you were asked to go in and do a call center training, and they were experiencing kind of plummeting morale in this call center, and just some real business problems. And you gave them a talk, but one thing you found was that the manager never really got to know them as people. That there was actually a lady who was in tears because for the first time ever, she had been told that she was important. And I think it was maybe 18 years or something she'd worked in this call center. They were handling death claims and all kinds of very important work for these people that were calling them at a very difficult point in their lives. And so I wanted to get your insight a little bit in giving that talk and as a manager of people.
Yeah.
What are your big big takeaways as a manager that you would apply to that situation?
So I don't know who's in the audience, but there's a president of High Point University. His name is Nito Quabain, and Nito was until he became president of High Point University, a very well-renowned motivational speaker. And I was with him one time during a meeting, and he made a comment to me that really has stuck with me. And he was talking to, as he was president of High Point University, the parents of the incoming freshmen. And he said, we are here to educate your children, not to train them. And if you don't think there's a difference between training and education, ask yourself one question. When your kids are in high school, do you want them getting sex education or sex training? And yeah, everybody laughed. It was funny. But his point was that we don't do a good enough job educating people on why they're doing what they do. And that's exactly what I found during this talk in the call center. The lady had worked there 18 years. After I got done telling her how important she was, she worked for an insurance company, life insurance company. I said, you understand, when you answer the phone, this was a group, it wasn't just her. When you answer the phone, you're talking to somebody at could be their most desperate time in life. They might have lost a husband, a wife, a father, a mother, a child. You don't know, a business partner. You don't know why they're calling. And they're not looking for a beneficiary form. They're looking for the form that keeps the promise that we in the field made them when this horrible event occurs. And it's important for them to be sympathetic and understand and empathetic of what these people are going through at this particular time. And that's where I go back to Nito's comment. They trained those people how to answer the phone, and they trained them how to put a form in an envelope and get it out to the client in an efficient manner. But what they never did was educate them on why they're doing it. And once they understood the why, that's when it really hit home for this particular person in the audience. And she said to me, it's the first time, and she was in tears, first time in 18 years I've been working here that anybody told me how important I was. And I would ask anybody on this call, do the people working in your office, do the people you're depending on for your success in our industry that are supporting you and helping you, have you educated them as to why they're doing what they're doing? Because we can train anybody to answer a phone, we can train anybody to do a CRM system, but why are they doing it? Why are you in the business? That's the message we got to get across to everybody that's working with us. That's how we all become much more successful.
And the meaning comes from that why, doesn't it, I think?
Absolutely.
My favorite chapter of your book was chapter 11, Imagine It Is Worse. That's the title, because of course things could almost always be worse, and that's a tremendous way to cultivate gratitude, I think, is that mindset. But then at the end of the chapter you say, but sometimes the best case happens. So sometimes it isn't the worst case, it's the best case. And I wanted to tack on a thought to that, which is sometimes over time you realize that the worst case was actually the best case, that when things don't work out for you, that actually that turns out to be the best case, even if you don't realize it at the time. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that concept. Imagine it is worse, and sometimes it's the best, and really how that has influenced you as a person and as a manager, as a businessman.
Well, look, I love being a fireman. It was in my blood. I loved it. I still hang out with the guys. I still do all the fire stuff except for actually fighting fire. And quite frankly, my kids, my wife will tell you, if I could go out tomorrow and do it, I would. So that has left a little bit of a hole in my lifespan that I wish I could have done more in that realm. But the fact that I couldn't led me to where I am today. And had that worst thing not happened, which, obviously nearly cost me my life, none of this would have happened. I would never have met my wife. I met her 2 years after my accident. Never would have met her. We never would have had these 3 terrific kids. I wouldn't have a great business partner. I wouldn't have the business and the company that I have. because there was a lot of things I learned from what was not going to happen and why it wasn't going to happen, and was able to apply them to what could be. And, you know, sometimes when you look back on your life, you're going to go, your worst moment may have been your best. And that just kind of works out that way.
Makes us who we are today. You had another quote in your book, which is, again, one of my favorites. If you're not betting on yourself all the time, you're just gambling. And
Yep.
yeah, I mean, we've all known people that stop betting on themselves, and it's not a good thing. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so, you know, my meaning behind that comment, I remember the editor of the book said, you know, do you really want to put this in there? And I said, sure, why wouldn't I want to put that quote in there? And he said, well, I just don't know if it makes sense. And I said, well, you don't understand the quote then. So, you know, at the end of the day, you know, this book was my product, right? And as much as editors or publishers and everybody else wanted to change things, you want to keep certain things in there. And they had reasons for not having certain things in there, and I was fine with taking a lot out. But at the end of the day, in that particular quote was, when I left Mass Mutual and went out on my own, I bet on myself, right? I took out a home equity loan on our home. My wife had just had our first baby. It was a tough time, right? But it wasn't like I took this money out of my house that I had and used it to bet on somebody else. I bet on me building the business, right? And I think everybody should have enough confidence in themselves and educate themselves well enough so that they gain that confidence to be able to bet on themselves, right? And my view has always been, I don't really, if a friend asks you to invest in a business of theirs, you're investing in them, not yourself, and you hope it works out. When you invest in yourself, you can make it work out, or you can cut your losses and go home. But they're your decisions to make. Okay, when you bet on someone else, you're betting that their decisions are going to be the right ones for you and your family. And my view is, you should bet on yourself and your decisions as many times as you can, because that's when you'll make really good decisions, because the amount of impact it has on your life, not just yours, your spouse, your children, etc. So that's the short, medium-winded answer to that question.
BrianPatrickWalsh.com, as you can see up on your screen, is how you can learn more. The book is Beyond the Mask: How My Tragedy Sparked an Incredible Life, Lessons I Might Never Have Learned. You now, of course, have a tremendously vital career in the insurance and financial services industry. And there's a lot of volatility right now. It's been quite a ride the past few months for our world, our country, and the markets. Could you give us your big picture overview of the state of the industry, where we've come from, where we're going, in your opinion?
Well, I love our industry. Obviously, I think, as I said earlier, it puts us in a position to be there at the most vulnerable times for people, and at their worst moments, give them some good news when nobody else can. So from an industry standpoint, I love it. It's in my blood. I do a lot for it. I've been a member of NAIFA for over 30 years, served as president of the Philadelphia chapter. There's so many great people in NAIFA in our industry, from looking at Tom Michael, Keith Gillies. You know, one of my mentors was Lester Rosen, who was a huge fan of NAIFA. NAIFA has been very important in my career. I remember manager taking me to my first meeting, and it wasn't a choice to join. You joined, and whether you had the money or not, you joined, and they took it out of your weekly commission voucher. And that's the days when we had commissions only. There were no financing plans or salaries or anything else. So sometimes you didn't really want to be a member. But it has changed my career for the better. I think the state of the country today provides tremendous opportunity for all of us in the industry. You think about what people who are going through this COVID thing right now, where they've been holed up for 3 months in their homes, not being able to work, not being able to communicate with people. We all know from my earlier discussion how important it is to have social bonding and social connection with people and have that in your life. We have a tremendous opportunity because I think people now have a different perspective on life than they had in February of 2020. Things were roaring. I mean, there were jokes, we're going to be in the roaring 20s again. The economy was good. People were doing what they wanted. They spent money like drunken sailors. I don't know if I can use that term anymore, but I just did. But I think people's perspectives has changed. And I think for the better. I think at the end of the day, people will seek out, and we know by all the statistics that LIMRA does, people want someone to talk to about the products and services that we offer. I think there's no greater time to be in our industry, and 2 of my children are in it, not in the same capacity. But it's a tremendous industry, and we have nothing but opportunity in front of us to help people. And the more people we can help, the better. And I will tell you this, we have a shortage of people that want to get into our industry. And that's our own fault because we don't do enough advocating for it. We don't tell people how wonderful this career is and why it's so wonderful. And we as a group need to do more of that. And we should never be ashamed of what we do for a living. I remember years ago, somebody said to me, boy, I hate telling people I sell life insurance. I said, well, you won't hate telling the next widow you hand a check to, right? And if someone disparages our profession, you should confront them and ask them why they think that way. And ask them questions of, did you ever have a death claim and paid in your family, and what did it do for you? And if you didn't, what could it have done for you? I'll tell you, when you ask those types of questions to people who are ignorant and don't know anything about something, they'll probably turn into a client. So again, getting back to confronting somebody or a confrontation, just asking questions of people to expose their ignorance helps educate them to what our industry does for people. And I think that's vitally important, much more so today than it was 4 months, 5 months ago. I think our industry will change because people will want to talk to somebody. I don't care anymore whether it's Zoom, in person, on the phone. They want someone to connect with, to empathize with them, to put them in their shoes and develop a financial plan that will solve all of their problems. And that's where we're headed. We don't have people in the industry anymore that just sell Medicare supplements or just sell health insurance or just sell life insurance or just sell mortgage insurance or just buy stocks and bonds. We have great people in the industry who take a holistic approach to the financial planning industry and solve all of these problems for people. And again, I can't say it enough. We're the only industry in the world that does it. And the only organization who helps us stay in business is NAIFA with their political advocacy. That is the only organization, and I tell people if they talk about the dues, well, the dues are expensive. If you had to buy a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. to keep you in business, how much would it cost you? They'll be glad to pay their dues after they see that number. So again, great industry. I think we have great opportunity ahead of us. I think people just need to stay persistent, be tenacious, and be proud of what we do, and make sure that they're proud when they're talking about it. That goes a long way to helping our industry.
Outstanding. Thank you, Brian. We have comments and questions. Comment from Colin. Thank you very much, Brian, for your great depth of knowledge and professional presentation. And thank you for that, Colin. And Florence says, I am a new agent, and your story and golden nuggets are helping me to push through this new career that I'm taking on. I thank you for your strength, and may God continue to bless you in all that you do. Thank you for that, Florence. Bruce,
Thank you very much, Florence.
Over the last 2.5 months, we've all taken a detour in life. What have you been learning, and what have you been changing?
That's a really great question. I don't know who asked it, but I can't see the who's on there. But it's a really great question. I will tell you what, I was flying 110, 120 flights a year. Felt like I lived most of the time in a hotel room. It took about a week to get adjusted to not being on the move, maybe 2 weeks. If you ask my wife, it's probably more like a month. But I'll tell you what I did. It gave me time to spend a lot of time, probably too much so for Marianne, but a lot of time with my family. And that I'm very thankful for that. I got to, kind of relook at everything and sit back and ponder, and not working on the book that was coming out, and seeing how the world was changing and how ridiculous it was that my daughter came up with the name of this book a year ago. And now people going to be out there in COVID masks. So, it gave me time to reflect on a lot of things. Like, boy, I did wait 12 years to write this book from my presentation at MDRT's main platform in 2005. But look at the timing of this coming out, right? So I look back on it and go, man, there was a reason I waited. I mean, I wasn't ready to do it. I started doing it 1.5 years ago, and now I think I got the reason why I did it. The other thing is, work-wise, it got me back to calling my clients consistently, rather than seeing them at an annual meeting and doing all the motions that we all go through in the industry after a while in the business and having all these clients to serve. It got me back to the roots of what I started. Picking up the phone, call my clients, and not asking them to do anything or buy anything or refer anybody, but just ask them how they're doing. How are they making out in this? And it brought me back to some really important things for me, that the humanity that we all possess, we need to execute on. And this allowed me to execute on that humanity by reconnecting on a more regular basis by phone with my clients.
We are about out of time. I want to thank Brian Walsh so much for joining us today for this NAIFA Big Ideas webinar to present his thoughts on Beyond the Mask, how my tragedy sparked an incredible life, lessons I might never have learned. And I also want to thank all of our participants for joining us today on this live broadcast. Please check your Facebook, check your LinkedIn for the latest news from NAIFA about our upcoming events, and also go to www.naifa.org. We have many upcoming events, members-only webinars, Big Ideas webinars, and NAIFA Town Hall meetings. This concludes the broadcast.